أشرقت نفسي بنور من فؤادي حينما رددت يا رب العباد وانتشت روحي.
وهو الذي خلق الليل والنهار والشمس والقمر كل في فلك يسبحون.
It is He who created the night and the day, and the sun and the moon. All the celestial bodies swim along, each in its own rounded course.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Now, this is the first challenge. Now, specifically, I want to go through the last section, or the last part of the verse, which says, كُلٌّ فِي فَلَكِ يَسْبَحُونَ. All celestial bodies swim along, each in its own rounded course. Now, initially, what I wanted to do was go through a detailed grammatical and linguistic analysis of this particular section, which is composed of 4 words. You have 2 nouns or isms, 1 verb, and 1 preposition. But I realized it was going to take too long. And the words used are very precise. Inshallah, in future videos, I'll be explaining the precision of the language that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used in this particular verse. I really honestly believe that this challenge is impossible. The challenge is open to everybody to produce something better than the Quran. And people might think that this is subjective, but I really doubt anybody cannot see the actual superiority of the Quran as opposed to the words of human beings, because they're 2 different types of speech. We have the speech of somebody who is very limited in knowledge, in vocabulary, in every aspect. And you have somebody who's created, who is the creator of the heavens and the earth, who has created everything, who's created our minds, who's created language. Obviously, they're going to be a world apart. I'm going to touch on one aspect of this particular section of the verse, where we get the translation, all celestial bodies, because these bodies were not even discovered back then. People didn't know that there were other moons and other suns, so to speak, because we have a sun is just a star, and we know there are millions of stars out there. So the sun is one of these stars. So let's get to the language. So Allah uses kullun. Kullun means every, all. So if I said every student, there's actually a word coming after every student, or every book, every man, every person. You need a word to come after every or all to complete it. If you just say every, you're actually waiting for the speaker to add something to make sense of what you mean by every. If I said give me every what? Now, what the Quran does is it actually just says every. But at the same time, in Arabic, what you can do is, when you omit that word, you put a extra vowel mark known as the tanween. So kullun. So this extra vowel mark actually indicates that there's a word omitted, and that's what's happening in the verse there. A question to ask is, why was this omitted, and what meanings does this give? So, to understand this a bit better, what's happening actually is this actually creates ambiguity and generalization. And we also need to, it says here, let us look at the context. We need to look at the context to understand this ambiguity. It's talking about Ash-Shams and Al-Qamar. Now, what we can do actually is go through the classical tafasir, the exegesis of the Quran by classical scholars. So we have two classical tafasir, and they both say the same thing. So I've quoted one of them, but they say relatively the same thing. So I've just put one up. This is, I think, from the first reference, which is Al-Kashaf by Allama Az-Zamakhshari. And he was from the 11th century AD. So that's like 900 years ago. So what he's actually saying there, I'm gonna just translate that, not word for word, but the meaning. So the scholars are saying that the omitted pronoun, there's actually an omitted pronoun, all of them. And this refers to suns and moons. So you have to remember this. All they knew back then was there was one sun and there was one moon. So these scholars are saying that the language indicates that there are suns and moons. Would he refer to them by a pronoun? Because a pronoun refers to something that one has spoken of or that one knows about. You don't use a pronoun for something that is hidden or something that is not even known about. So in this case, we have a pronoun that's not even mentioned. So in other words, what's happening here? It refers to every celestial body. All celestial bodies, those that we know of, in the case of the revelation, what was known was just the two that were mentioned, the sun and the moon. But the point to note is that the pronoun in kullun is not mentioned. It refers to those that we know of and those that we will discover later on. And that's why the ambiguity there. At the same time, what it's saying, and this is another point of the actual language, is we have fi falakin. Fi falakin is a prepositional phrase, and that actually should have come after this verb, yasbahun, to swim. I'm not going to explain why this verb was used. I'll explain the rhetorical device of that. But just to quickly explain, fi falakin being put first, it actually creates what's known as ikhtisas. That every celestial body is only fi falakin. Falakin, I'll explain this in a lot more detail, insha'Allah, means a rounded course. It's a round course that one swims along. And what it's saying is that every celestial body is in no other motion except for this rounded motion, for a rounded motion. And the indefiniteness of falakin indicates that each one has its own rounded course. Not that it's the same rounded course for everybody, but that each one has its own rounded course. And inshallah, I'll explain all this in a lot more detail in future videos once I get some challenges to this particular verse. Inshallah, I'll be looking forward to that, and I'll be looking actually forward also to explaining this verse in a lot more detail, because there's actually quite a lot more discussion.